We are here today because she's turned to writing about her time as a surgeon at Mother Charity Hospital in New Orleans. And we want to know more about this local author and teller of tales. Everyone, Martha B. Boone, on behalf of the North Atlanta Author Series, we're so glad you could be here today to talk with us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So what does Martha B. Boone, what does the B stand for?
Boatwright.
Boatwright.
Yes. And one of my oldest friends, who I'm going to make stand up, came from the same small town as me. She knows everything about me. So if you've got any money, she'll probably tell you some things that I'm not willing to tell you. And she served in our Army, active duty. Amazing human being, small town girl. Stand up, Renee Alford. This is my greater than 50-year-old friend, 50 years of friendship. If somebody can love you after 50 years, that's a miracle. Okay, I'm sorry.
No.
I'll tell you, I get off script.
Great. That's perfect. Let's go off script a lot. Okay. So Mother Charity in New Orleans, you call it the Big Free. Is that its official nickname?
So Charity Hospital New Orleans has many nicknames. The Big House, the Big Free, Mother Charity, the Mothership. It's part of what was a large charity hospital system throughout the state, and actually one of the more successful charity hospital systems that went statewide anywhere. But the people who lived and worked there and the patients had many nicknames for it.
Well, I've noticed in each one of your books that in your dedication that you give a special shout out to all the people who work at these hospitals, especially nurses. And I was really impressed by the line that you included in the dedication for the unfettered urologist that says, if you have a great hospital, it's because you have great nurses. I think we can all agree with that. Yeah. And if you would be so kind as to also read the dedication in Mother Charity here, okay, because it's slightly different, and I think it's very interesting as well.
So for many people who haven't had a whole lot of contact with the medical system, and I'm glad for you, it's a team sport, and people don't really realize there's so much going on in the background. I mean, the administrative people, the techs, without those people doing their job, the hospital just doesn't work. And the core of the hospital are the nurses. They're the ones who are there when the doctor's not there, when the doctor's at home sleeping, and they're also the patient advocate. So that's what led to the dedication in the Unfettered Urologist. But in Mother Charity, I was writing for the people who were at Charity Hospital, the nurses, the doctors, the patients, the techs, anybody who came through that place. I wanted to memorialize it after Hurricane Katrina basically destroyed it so that it's never going to be a fully functioning hospital again. And this is my dedication. To the many people who worked at Charity Hospital in New Orleans over its 66 years at 1532 Tulane Avenue. It's remembered as one of the largest hospitals for uninsured people in America. We who were there lovingly remember it as one of the best trauma centers in America. Charity was a training ground for greatness. We did everything with nothing. If you were there, no one need explain it to you. If you weren't there, nobody can explain it to you. These are our stories. May we laugh and cry and remember the joy of a job well done.
That's just beautiful. I love that. And so I'm wondering if your time with all of these people, working across the whole span of your healthcare experience when you go into a hospital, if that's partly the reason why you wrote these books.
Yes, in my first novel, I was basically trying to process all of the emotions from my years of doing trauma surgery. I had grown up in a small southern town. It was very sweet there. We were church people. Most of us didn't even curse. I had never seen anybody shot except for one Bubba who was trying to kill a deer, and he fell off of his deer blind and shot himself in the leg. So I really was pretty naive. And when I hit Charity Hospital and we were in the middle of the drug wars, this was when crack cocaine was going crazy in New Orleans, and we would have 10 to 20 gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen in the accident room there in a 24-hour period. One of my colleagues, Jane Benson, raise your hand, Jane, She's one of the greatest general surgeons I've ever worked with. And she was there. She knows it all. So if I tell a lie, she'll scream out, "That's not true." But anyway, to be able to let people know what went on during that time, because it was so shocking to me to see all of the man's inhumanity to man, and to just see what it was like to be in a situation that was so intense like that. And so the first book was basically trying to manage my emotions. And one of mine and Jane's mentors, Dr. Norman McSwain, he was the person who really pushed me to write the book. After Hurricane Katrina really tore up the hospital, he said, you have to turn these stories into something that will memorialize the place. So that was kind of the first book. Then The Unfettered Urologist, my patients kept calling me 2 years later after I had retired. The referral doctors, the family members, some of the nurses, they were still calling me for medical advice. So I started jotting down what the questions were, and I decided that maybe a book was in order. So it's kind of a cross between a love story to my patients and a bit of a memoir about my time in urology. And then the third book, Mother Charity, is the follow-up to The Big Free, and it's kind of more of the story. My readers were really on me because they said, it's not normal for a 25-year-old girl to have no romance in her life. Well, I'm not a particularly romantic person. One of my friends here, D.L. White, who does write a lot of romance, raise your hand. If you're looking for romance, talk to her. But, she writes a lot of romance, and for me, it was so hard. So I wanted to stretch myself a little bit to try to weave a little bit of that in there with all the trauma and the drama. The gunshot wound to the chest was a whole lot easier for me to write than was the he picked her up the door for a date kind of scene.
Well, you're talking about all of this drama and this chaos that you were experiencing on a daily basis. So how do you go from something like all of that, where you're interacting with people, everything is exciting, to writing, which is pretty much a solitary activity that you're doing by yourself? What kind of a transition was that for you after retiring?
Yeah. I had always written. Since the time I was about 6 years old, I would write in journals, and it was always a way that I would process my emotions. The hard part was to learn how to write so that someone else could see what you were actually trying to tell. And there's a great deal of work in the craft of writing. There's a lot to know. And it's like any kind of skill. The more you do it, the better you get. And so I enjoyed the process of learning the craft. If there's anybody out there who thinks they want to write a book, I strongly recommend you consider the Atlanta Writers Club. They have all kinds of resources. It's just a wonderful, wonderful club. It's been in Atlanta for over 100 years. And so if you're thinking you might want to write a book, I would strongly recommend you consider going there.
You pretty much sit down every morning to write. You have a morning practice of writing that I understand kind of as a carryover from your time as a surgeon, when you had to get up at, god-awful early hours to be into the OR at, and you couldn't be late, no matter how you felt, there you had to be. Do you feel like that sort of experience has helped you in that transition to have the discipline to, write these books in spite of the fact that, you're traveling, you're doing promotion, but obviously you keep writing at the same time?
Well, I think anybody who's worked in medicine has a lot of discipline, because you have to do what the patient needs, and it doesn't really matter how you feel. You can be hungry and want lunch, but too bad, you got to do what you got to do. When someone comes in and they need their appendix removed, they don't really care that you've been up all night already or that you're hungry. And, if you're the nurse and the person who's to replace you hasn't come in, well, guess what? You're the nurse a few more hours than you thought you were going to be. So I think medicine does teach you a lot about discipline. And so my ability to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and write until 5, I think that did come from the discipline that I learned, in doing surgery, because you got to do what you got to do, whether you feel like it or not. It's probably a bit like being a parent, when the kid's got to go to the doctor or something's wrong with the kid, you don't really have a choice about what to do or what not to do.
Well, since I actually am not a morning person, I'm more of a night owl, I've been reading Mother Charity at night and having to kind of stifle some giggles, because some of these scenes are just so outrageous of the things that happen. They're hilarious. And I just kept thinking, there's no way that this really happened. And so I have to know, was this based on things that really happened?
So every single scene in Mother Charity actually happened. Now, the hospitals are changed, the people involved are changed. Some of the stories are things that people told me, like the character of Leotis. He's based on a friend of mine that zany things happen to all the time. So everything that happened with Leotis, when you read him, you're going to go, that couldn't have happened. Trust me, it did. So in this particular book, everything did happen, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent and to certainly give anonymity to the patients that were involved. So it's scrambled around, but it all did happen.
Well, I'm guessing that, while you were going through it, it wasn't, everyone was laughing and having a high time of it. I imagine some of it was pretty traumatic and vivid in the memory. So it has been, writing this down in the form of humor been helpful for you to process some of these memories and, see them in a different light than when you were going through them as a younger surgeon.
I found myself during the writing, at times I would cry, and a lot of times I would laugh. The dark humor of the hospital was a big shock to me. Being, a naive little South Carolina girl, I was really flabbergasted when I realized people would be laughing at the most horrendous situations. But, it was a coping mechanism. And so now I've kind of encompassed that dark humor, and I have to be really careful to put a lid on it, with normal folks who aren't used to that. I mean, one of my long-term patients who I absolutely adore, he came in and I said, we're going to use you for prostate screening. He's like, yeah, that's okay. I figured you would. Well, so
don't put a lid on it now, by all means. Let that lid off now.
I don't know. My husband's in the back, and he usually kind of gives me the sign if I'm getting too far out of line. I forgot the question. What was the rest of the question?
Well, just, is writing a book that's humorous helping you to kind of frame some of these traumatic memories differently as you were then? Yeah.
So at one point I was thinking I was going to be a pediatric urologist, and what I didn't know about myself was that I really could not cope with the death of children. Yeah. Every single child that I ever took care of that died, I still remember their names. I still remember what their parents looked like. So it took me 3 books to tell any of the stories about things that happened, with children in the hospital. And I ended up obviously not being a pediatric urologist because I could not steel myself to be able to deal with that. So those scenes, I actually did cry during the writing and the editing of those scenes. And I think it did help me, get some of it out eventually.
And I was also wondering, not just the events that happened, but are some of the characters in these stories based on real people in real life? There's one in particular, a creation of yours called a Dr. White, that is sort of the nemesis for Elizabeth in all of this. And you have a quote that I thought was very interesting that Elizabeth, your main character, makes about him. And she says, Elizabeth had no prior experience with people who, for no apparent reason, heartily disliked her and desired she fail. Livy said his perfectionism drove him, but Elizabeth thought he might simply hate women doctors. So did you ever run across this attitude in someone like this during your career? No. By any chance?
That never happened.
I imagine that you're not naming names, but it sounds like there might be more than one. And so, yeah.
So I think anybody who was training in surgery, it was hard. I mean, whether you were a man or a woman or whatever, surgery training was hard. Long hours, very intense. For both doctors and nurses, it was intense. And, there were some men who thought women shouldn't be in surgery just yet. But there were more men who were my champions. There were guys who knew it was time for ladies to be in surgery, and, they were my mentors, and they were my supporters. I was a woman urologist before I ever knew one, so it was an interesting time. But, yeah, there was some chauvinism, but I think my childhood, my upbringing prepared me for that, because in our family, men and women did everything. If you were physically capable of doing it, then you could do it. On the family farm, if the pig got out, Granddaddy didn't say, oh, that's a girl's job or a boy's job. It was like whoever was closer to the pig better grab that pig before it got in the highway. And I see Renee laughing because she knows this. And so there was not a whole lot of division. If you had the physical capability to do it, then, you got out there and do it. And I think that kind of helped me deal with some of the chauvinism because I just ignored it and went ahead and did whatever I had to do. And I was also very focused on the patients. You know, when you're really thinking about your job and what you're supposed to do, and you're trying to really perfect your skills and taking care of people, it's easier to kind of let that other stuff go to the side and not focus on it as much.
Well, another character that shows up in both of your novels is the city of New Orleans itself. And she's described it in a way that I just absolutely love. She says, civilized and seedy were next door neighbors in New Orleans. So was it fun to revisit New Orleans and the hospital in your mind while you were writing all of this?
It really is. I mean, what makes a good character? You want somebody who's got good attributes and bad attributes. So even in your worst villain, you want there to be something redeeming about them. And in your most amazing, you know, altruistic Mother Teresa type character, you want to have something negative about them. So New Orleans has a whole lot of fabulous stuff and a whole lot of hideous stuff. So it just naturally made a good character. Also, the sights, the sounds, the smells. I mean, think of the smells of New Orleans. If you walk through that garden district in the springtime, the smell of jasmine will just blow your mind. But you can also walk down Bourbon Street early in the morning after the partiers have been out there, and you can experience a whole different set of smells. And then think about the taste. I mean, to me, New Orleans has the best food in the world. All that great seafood that's sitting right down there at the bottom of that muddy Mississippi, the Creole cooking, the Cajun cooking. And then think about the music. I mean, you've got jazz, you've got Zydeco. So there's just so many things about New Orleans that did make it a good character, and I had fun revisiting that.
Well, and also the hospital itself as a setting, I think is so interesting for a writer because, you know, the human body itself is a story and a mystery. I mean, you know, when something is wrong with it and we go to the doctor, you know, we tell them the details of this story and we're trying to find, you know, the culprit. So it's sort of like we're in this murder mystery almost, or there's all this dramatic tension as we go through a hospital of, you know, trying to find out the clues to what's wrong with us. And, you know, and there's so many indignities as well that it lends itself to slapstick comedy. And it just feels like there's just so much rich material in a hospital for structuring a novel like this. Did you find that it was the setting with New Orleans and the hospital, that aspect was almost writing itself as you went?
It really was. I mean, anybody who's worked in a hospital setting, it's like a world of its own. And the characters are the same when you move from one place to the other. I mean, in an inner city hospital, it's even more intense because you have all that trauma and drama going on. But in any hospital setting, it makes for a great story. I mean, just about every day could be the hero's journey. You know, you come into it, you're an ordinary person, there's some inciting event, and then you're trying to make a decision, are you going to go here or go there? And then there are helpers along the way, and there are enemies or evil people along the way. And then in the course of the day or the story, you know, you turn around and you're transformed in some way. And one of the things I loved about the hospital environment is the most basic people will demonstrate their greatness. You know, you'll see someone get a cancer diagnosis and you'll watch their families transform into these amazing people to help them. And you'll watch people get through things that are just hideous because they want to live for their children or their grandchildren. And so you get to see that greatness in people that you don't see every day in ordinary life. And you also get to be there when people are born, which is an amazing thing. Raise your hand, Melanie, my gynecologist buddy over here. You get to see people born, and then you have the privilege of going through to the end of the life with people, which is also a lot of a spiritual experience. So, yeah, there's a whole lot there you can write about.
Well, it also seems like your character Elizabeth, you know, as a young surgeon coming up, that every time that she enters into the hospital, you know, she goes through the hallways and she meets up with all these characters, and you have to go down into the lower environs, and she learns something each time that she goes in, and everything comes to her as this hard-won knowledge. Did you feel like you were creating someone that was mirroring your experience of some sort of hard-won knowledge that shows up as themes in your books?
Yeah, I think so. Elizabeth was a pretty shy, insecure person. So to end up into the world of surgery, which is so rough and tumble at that particular time, being an insecure young woman, to see her be able to rise up and do what needed to be done, even when she was terrified. It reminded me a lot of when I used to go scuba diving. I was the most skittish scuba diver you've ever seen. I mean, every time I would get off the boat, I was certain it was going to kill me. And I would stand on the end of the boat and think to myself, I've had a pretty good life. If I'm going to die down here, at least I'll be looking at the fish, when I died scuba diving. And so I think Elizabeth was a bit like that in the hospital. She was doing what she needed to do, but she was pretty terrified a large amount of the time.
Well, speaking of terrified, let's move on to getting reviews online.
Oh,
so, you're not a newbie when it comes to getting reviews, because there have been websites for where you can go in and review your doctor and say in an uncensored way, anything that you like. Has it been similar for reading reviews online for your novels?
So it was a big shock to me when people started going on Google and berating their doctor. But it was fascinating because within 2 hours of me being the same person in the office, one person would think I was their savior, and the other person would think I was the devil incarnate. So it would be the same day, I'd be treating everybody similarly, and one would think I had saved their life, and the other one would think I had tried to kill them. So after years of reading these Google reviews, I kind of started to really take it all a bit with a grain of sand. But I had 2 reviews which fascinated me. One of them was particularly ugly from a woman. Well, it turned out that about 30 years ago, she and I were interested in the same man, and he was interested in me and not interested in her. And then another particularly nasty one was a gentleman who had invited me to the prom, and I decided to go with someone else. So I realized that the reviews, they don't have all that much to do with me, but I did get some excellent critiques from other authors. I had buddies like Mike Brown and my buddy Erskine Hawkins, y'all raise your hands, and Susan Sands, author friends of mine, who did give me, critique that was very helpful. My dialogue was particularly not great in one of my first books. And so these people would stand up and say, hey, you might want to look at this or look at that. And so those kinds of criticisms have proven to just be wonderful, because at the end of the day, what do I want? I want to write better the next time than I did the last time. So I think, taking criticism is a part of learning any skill. You're just not going to get better if you can't take criticism.
Well, I was privileged to read an advanced reader's copy of Mother Charity, and I can tell you, she is getting more and more skilled at being a storyteller. So you're in for a real treat. And since we're talking about reviews online, I want to remind all of you how important it is to authors that you all leave reviews online. It's hard to overemphasize how crucial this is. So after this, when you get your signed copy, please, if you would, take a photo of yourself holding the cover, and maybe include Martha in the photo as well. And please post it to your social media, as well as leaving a review on Amazon, Goodreads, or Barnes & Noble. And you don't have to buy it from any of those sites. You can have the one that you bought here today through an independent bookseller that we love, Annelle Gerson of Bookmiser. And you can still go on Amazon and leave those reviews, even if you only leave the stars and don't have something written out. Please do that as well. Thank you. So right now, I'm going to open it up to all of your interesting, intriguing questions from the audience that you have for Martha, since you are a captive audience for their questions now. So,
Great. Anybody got a question?
I know you do, Gabby.
How did you pick urology? I mean, how did you actually go there of all the things?
So the question was, how did I pick urology? So I was a wildlife biologist before I ever wanted to do medicine, and I realized that nobody really cared about the wildlife. It was all about the money. So my mentor said, well, why don't you try medical school? So I started medical school, and I was one of those real tree-hugging, save the whales, Peace Corps kind of folks. So I figured I'd do primary care, and then I would join the Peace Corps. Well, I was shocked when I found out that many of the diseases that people come to primary care for are self-inflicted, and that many people were not willing to take personal responsibility for their health. So they wouldn't take their medicine, they wouldn't follow the diet, they wouldn't exercise, and I found all that very frustrating. And then when I rotated on surgery, I learned that I love immediate gratification. I also learned that I'm extremely impatient. So when someone would quit nodding your head, Renee, so when someone would come in with appendicitis, they'd come in, screaming and carrying on, take them to the operating room, take out their appendix, and they go home a day or so later, and they're like all happy. And I was like, dang, that appeals to me. So I wanted to do hand surgery. And when they set us up for our rotations, they had too many people who wanted the hand surgery rotations, so they put me in urology. And I was down at the dean's office going, I do not want to be on that peace service. I will take anything else. And they're like, so sad, too bad, you lost the lottery. You're going to be on the urology service for 6 weeks. Well, by the end of the 6 weeks, I realized I loved it. There were so many interesting things. Urology takes care of intersex. There were a lot of cancer cases, kidney stone cases. You took care of men, women, and children. So I went to the chairman of the Department of Urology, and I said, I think I want to be a urologist. And he said, well, you're a very smart girl, but urology is really not ready for women. So I walked out of his office going, I think I'm going to be a urologist. So I think it was meanness and hard-headedness that led to urology.
Someone else. I know yes.
So retirement has been very interesting. It's not been at all what I thought it was going to be. I really, really miss the nurses. And I miss probably about half my patients. And I find that the discipline is harder because before I retired, I had 100 things a day I had to do, whether I wanted to do them or not. And so 4 to 5 was writing time. There was no, going back and forth about whether I was going to do it or not. Now that I'm retired, it's like if it's something I don't want to do, I don't want to do it. If I could get somebody to brush my teeth, I'd probably hire them. So I was doing better with the discipline of it before I retired. So yeah, that's been a really interesting transition.
Yes.
So
the question was, Mike Brown, who's a great author, he liked the scene in The Big Free that involved Sister Mary and the Angola prisoner. And in the next book, there's no Angola. And Sister Mary is not in that one either, so sorry. But we have some new characters that you might even like better. You're going to love Leotis, okay?
Yeah. Who else?
Tell us your love of pearls.
So her question was, tell us your love of pearls. I've always loved pearls. My family didn't have much money, so my pearls were like fake when I was younger. And I had some pearls from my grandmother at one point. And in surgery, I kind of started to feel almost kind of neutered. There really wasn't any place for your femininity in the world of surgery. All those television shows that make it look like, the doctors and nurses are having sex in the ER all the time, there really wasn't too much time for that because you usually had somebody's body fluids on you. And quite frankly, you were more interested in food than you were in, the other sex. But those pearls would kind of remind me of home. I could touch them and feel them, and they were a little bit like a talisman, And one of the visual images that I like from the book is that she would wear those pearls and get blood on them. And then when she was going out somewhere, she would turn them around and have the pearls that were still clean on the front. And so that was a little bit of what it was like to be in surgery because you had this very intense life at the hospital that you couldn't really share with everybody because not everybody could understand it. And then you would try to transform away from that life back into a more quote-unquote normal person. But the pearls reminded me of my femininity and of the normal world and a family and home.
And also in the book, it functions so well as a symbol for wisdom because of the idea of, on one side, facing everybody is the pristine white side, but on the back is the hard-worn experience of the bloody red that would get on the pearls. So it's a really striking image. So look for that when you're reading it. Yes, again?
I really hate this question. Did you turn me off? Am I?
You're all
Did I not pay the bill, Lance? So she asked me if I like writing fiction or nonfiction. And my husband hates to answer this question, so just cover up your ears. I am a natural-born liar. So whenever something happens, I'm already thinking, how to elaborate and make it bigger. And I've been like that since I was like this tall. So fiction is easy for me because I'm seeing a story and I'm thinking of how to make it better. Nonfiction took me a little minute because I had to recognize this is information that the patients are going to be using. This is stuff that, hopefully nurse practitioners and PAs and, medical students and patients will be reading. And so I have to make sure that it's accurate and I have to research every little thing. And so it took more time as far as like checking and double checking to be sure that the information that I had when I had retired was still accurate, and putting the references onto the website. So if somebody wanted to go and look something up, like I talked a bit about the value of cranberry supplements in recurrent urinary tract infections, and I had to read all the latest research, and I found the lady who was the world's expert on cranberry research and communicated with her. So it was a little bit different process. Yeah. So I like both, but fiction comes easier to me. So this is a younger generation doctor over here. And back in the day, like with the gray hair, at Charity Hospital, New Orleans, we actually shared a call room. So there was one girl and several guys sharing the same call room. Now, we were rotating them, and we had the same bathroom. There would be 2 or 3 beds in the room, and there would be a bathroom. But they didn't have a ladies' and a gentlemen's section. And so in the middle of the day, if 2 people showed up there to take a nap, it might be a man and a woman, asleep in the same call room and sharing the same bathroom. So they weren't really particularly persnickety about having anything special for the women. And there weren't really women's locker rooms. Women's surgeons' locker rooms. You would share the room with the nurses, which was perfectly fine. But there weren't a lot of accommodations for females. Yeah. So I talk about that a lot in The Unfettered Urologist. It was almost like being 3 doctors. In the early days of my career, I was the trusted advisor. And so people would come in and I would give them advice. If they weren't going to do what I suggested, they usually wouldn't tell me to my face. They would just go on out and do whatever they were going to do. And this would occur a lot with nurses. And then in the middle of my career, I had a lot of baby boomer patients who were my own age group. And they were looking for a trusted confidant, someone who was going to help them. Like my financial advisor sitting there in the back. He's a professional. He has a lot of information, and he's there to guide me. He doesn't tell me what to do, but he knows a whole lot more about this than me. And so he's my trusted advisor. And that was kind of what the baby boomers wanted. They wanted, it was their body. They weren't going to do everything you said, but they valued your knowledge. And then the younger kids come along, and they've done a Google search. They know who all the world's experts are. They've diagnosed themselves. They know what they want. They come in with a stack of stuff about this thick. And if you don't sing the song that Dr. Google sings, then they'll walk right past your 20 diplomas and go sit in their car on their iPhone and give you a critique about how ignorant you are. So the patient interactions definitely changed. And, with each generation, it was interesting. With the older people, it was just tell me what to do, doctor, but you better get it right. With the baby boomers, it was like, well, yeah, I'll talk to my friends and decide what I'm going to do. And then with the younger generation, they wanted to call you by your first name, and, they thought they knew more than you did. So it was an interesting transition with the different types of patients. So what else?
Well, I'm going to wrap up right now so that we don't run out of time for Martha to meet with all of you and do the signings. But I would like to, before we go, tell you why this particular book has some new personal meaning for me. In the last couple months, my father was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and he's undergoing treatment for it now. So it has been a real comfort to me to be able to compare what his doctor is telling us with what Martha has told us in this book. And I just would like to thank all of you who have devoted the majority of your time to helping extend and improve the lives of so many of us who have families who are in crisis and in need of your expertise. So I want to thank you. And please, let's all give her a round of applause. Thank you.
I appreciate everybody coming. I know lives are very busy, and I appreciate the time that you took to come out and be here with me. It means a lot to me.